You were never enough for me. You know that, right? You never were. My husband said those words without even turning around to look at me. He kept folding his shirts, placing them neatly into the open suitcase on our bed, the bed we had shared for 11 years, as if he were packing for a business trip rather than dismantling our marriage. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom with my arms at my sides, watching him, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I didn't cry. I thought I would cry. I had imagined this moment, in my worst nightmares, and I always imagined myself falling apart. Instead, I just felt cold. I've been unhappy for years, he continued, pressing down on the stack of clothes so the lid of the suitcase would close. I stayed because I felt sorry for you. But I can't keep doing that. I deserve to be happy. Megan makes me happy. Megan. His colleague. 26 years old. I had known about her for 7 months. So that's it, I said. He finally looked at me. And the thing that I will never forget, the thing that still sits in my chest like a stone, was that he looked almost annoyed. Not guilty. Not sad. Annoyed, the way you look at someone who is slowing you down. Don't make this dramatic, Rachel, he said. You'll be fine. You're practical. That's what you do. He zipped the suitcase, picked it up off the bed, and walked past me out of the room. I heard the front door open and close. I heard his car start in the driveway. And then I heard nothing. I stood there in our bedroom for a long time. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, looked at the empty closet where his clothes used to be, and I started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because my husband had just made the single biggest mistake of his life, and he had absolutely no idea. Let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. I met my husband when I was 24 years old. I was working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm in the city. And he came in as a client, Daniel Marsh, co-owner of a regional logistics company his father had started. He was charming and confident, and he paid attention to me in a way that felt, at the time, like being chosen. I was young enough to confuse intensity with love. We married 2 years later. For the first few years, things were good, or at least good enough that I didn't look too closely at what wasn't. Daniel was ambitious. He wanted the company to grow, which meant long hours, which meant he was often gone. His mother, Patricia, made no secret of the fact that she thought her son had married beneath him. She was polite enough in public, but in private she had a way of making small comments that accumulated over time like water damage, slow, invisible, and eventually structural. Daniel works so hard. It would be nice if you contributed more. The house looked nicer before. Don't you think a woman in your position should dress better? Daniel never defended me. He would change the subject or find somewhere else to be. I told myself that was just how he was, that he didn't like conflict. I made excuses for him the way you make excuses for people you have decided to love unconditionally. What I didn't know, for most of our marriage, was that my mother had been watching all of this very carefully. My mother, Carol, was a quiet woman. She had been a bookkeeper for 30 years, and she had the kind of precise, unsentimental mind that notices things other people miss. She adored me in the way quiet people adore, not loudly, not with grand gestures, but steadily, the way a foundation holds a house. She never said anything critical about Daniel directly. She never told me what to do. But she watched. She passed away from a stroke when I was 31. It was sudden. There one day, and then gone. I fell apart in a way I had not expected, and Daniel was kind to me in the immediate aftermath, which I held on to as evidence that the marriage was real and worth saving. It was 6 months after my mother died that I found the first message. I wasn't snooping. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter, and it lit up while I was standing right next to it. The preview of the message was visible before the screen dimmed. It was from a contact saved as just an initial M. The message said, "Thinking about you. Last night was everything." I picked up the phone. I don't know what I expected to find. What I found was over a year of messages. Photos. Plans. Conversations in which my husband talked about me like I was a problem he was managing. I put the phone down exactly where he had left it. I went upstairs, sat in the bathroom with the door locked, and I thought for a very long time. Here is what I did not do. I did not confront him. I did not cry. I did not call my best friend or my sister. I sat there and I thought about my mother, who had been a bookkeeper for 30 years, who had noticed everything and said very little, and I thought, what would she do? She would get organized. So that is what I did. The first thing I did was call an attorney, not a divorce attorney yet, just a consultation. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I needed to understand what was mine, what was ours, and what I might lose if I moved too quickly. The attorney, a woman named Sandra who had been doing family law for 20 years, asked me to bring in our financial documents. I came back 2 weeks later with everything I could find. What I learned in that meeting changed everything. When Daniel and I had gotten married, he brought the logistics company into the marriage. His name was on everything. I had signed a prenuptial agreement, his mother's insistence, and I had agreed because I was 26 and in love, and I thought prenuptial agreements were what people with money used against people without it, not what marriages were built on. What I had not understood, and what Sandra carefully explained to me, was that the prenup as written was only valid if neither party had engaged in marital misconduct. There was a morality clause. His attorney at the time had apparently inserted it as a formality, probably never expecting it to matter. It mattered now. I did not tell Sandra everything yet. I just asked her to hold my file and to be ready. Then I left and started being very careful. For the next 7 months, I lived 2 lives. On the surface, I was Rachel Marsh, loyal wife, woman who occasionally had dinner alone because her husband was working late. Underneath, I was building a case. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Gary, who had the energy of a man who had seen everything and found most of it mildly interesting. He documented the affair thoroughly. Hotels, restaurants. Twice, Megan's apartment. He gave me photos, time-stamped records, everything I needed. I also went through our finances line by line. What I found there was its own education. Daniel had, over the last 3 years, been quietly shifting assets. Small transfers. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger suspicion on a casual review, but consistent and directional money moving from joint accounts toward accounts that had only his name. I printed everything. I gave copies to Sandra, and then I waited for him to leave. I did not have to wait long. Daniel and I had a dinner party the evening before he packed his suitcase, a work event at a colleague's house, and he spent most of the night across the room from me, talking to other people, not once making eye contact. On the drive home, he was quiet. When we got inside, he said, "I need to talk to you tomorrow." I said, "Okay." The next morning, he packed. He stood in our bedroom and told me I was never enough. He told me I should be grateful he had stayed as long as he had. He told me Megan made him happy. And then he left. I sat on the edge of the bed and laughed. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. "I need you to sign some papers," he said. He was using his business voice, clipped, transactional, the voice he used when he wanted to close something quickly and move on. "What kind of papers?" "The house is in my name. I need you to vacate within 30 days. My attorney has drafted an agreement. Given the prenup, you're not entitled to the company or any of the business assets, so there's really nothing complicated here. I'm being fair." I was quiet for a moment. "Daniel," I said, "do you remember the morality clause in the prenup?" Silence. "I'm sorry?" He finally said. "The morality clause. In the prenuptial agreement. Section 4, paragraph 2. It states that the agreement is null and void in the event that either party engages in documented marital infidelity." I paused. "I have documentation." More silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "What are you talking about? You don't have anything." "I have 14 months of records," I said. "Hotel receipts. Photographs. Correspondence. I also have documentation of approximately $80,000 in assets you transferred out of joint accounts over the past 3 years. My attorney calls that dissipation of marital assets. I call it interesting." I could hear him breathing. "You've been planning this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've been organized," I said. "There's a difference." He hung up. I sat with the quiet for a moment, and then I called Sandra. What happened over the next several weeks was not simple or clean or satisfying in a simple way. Divorce is not a movie. There are depositions and document reviews and phone calls where attorneys speak in a language that sounds like English but isn't quite. But the shape of it, the direction of it, was clear from the beginning. Daniel's prenup was unenforceable. His asset transfers were documented and would be treated as marital waste. The house, which he had assumed he would simply reclaim, was subject to equitable distribution. He had been operating under the assumption that I would take whatever he offered and be grateful. He was wrong. His attorney, to his credit, was professional throughout. Daniel was not. He called me twice, once to accuse me of destroying his reputation, once to suggest that the whole thing was my fault for not being the wife he needed. I did not engage. I let Sandra handle it. Patricia called me once. My mother-in-law, who had spent 11 years making small comments about my clothes and my career and my general inadequacy, called me to tell me that I was being vindictive and that I was destroying her son's life for money. She said I had always been grasping. She said Daniel deserved someone who truly understood him. I listened to everything she said. Then I said, "Patricia, I hope you and Daniel are very happy together," and I hung up. The divorce was finalized 4 months after he left. I received the house. I received half of the marital assets, which were substantial once the transferred funds were returned and assessed. I received a settlement that Sandra described as favorable and that I described as fair. Daniel received the logistics company, which was what he cared most about. He and Megan were already living together. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. About 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into a former colleague of Daniel's at the grocery store, a man named Phil who had worked with him for years and had always been decent to me. We made small talk in the produce section for a few minutes, and then Phil said, almost offhandedly, "Hey, I don't know if you've heard, but things have been rough over there." I asked what he meant. He hesitated. I probably shouldn't say much. But the Kaplan account pulled out. And without Kaplan, I don't know how they make the numbers work. I thanked him and we went our separate ways. I drove home thinking about what he had said. The Kaplan account was the logistics company's largest client, a distribution contract that I knew, from 11 years of hearing about it at the dinner table, represented nearly 40% of annual revenue. I knew that because I had actually run the initial numbers on that contract, years ago, when Daniel had needed help with a proposal and I was still in accounting. I had forgotten more about that company's finances than Daniel had ever bothered to learn. Later that week, I found out what had happened. Megan, it turned out, had not been entirely honest with Daniel about her own situation. She had been seeing him while simultaneously maintaining a relationship with someone else, someone who was a senior partner at the firm that managed the Kaplan account's legal work. When that relationship surfaced, it had created a very awkward professional situation. Kaplan, a conservative family-owned business, had decided quietly but firmly to move their contract to a different logistics provider. I did not feel pleased when I heard this. I felt something more complicated, the particular exhaustion that comes from watching someone make the same kinds of choices repeatedly and then be surprised by the consequences. Daniel called me a third time, a few weeks after the Kaplan news became common knowledge. It was a Sunday evening. I almost didn't answer. But I did. "I need to talk to you," he said. His voice was different from the business voice and different from the angry voice. It was a voice I had not heard in a long time, almost uncertain, almost small. "Okay," I said. "Things have been difficult," he said. "Professionally. I'm dealing with some significant challenges at the company, and I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About us." I didn't say anything. "I made mistakes," he said. "I know that. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But I think we made sense together. You and I. You always understood the business. You understood how I thought. Megan doesn't." He stopped. "Things with Megan aren't working." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "And I meant it in the way you can mean something without it changing anything." "I'm not asking to get back together," he said quickly. "I just think maybe we could talk. Maybe there's a way to. I don't know. You're the most competent person I've ever known, Rachel." I think I didn't appreciate that. I held the phone and looked out the window at my backyard, which was coming into bloom. I had planted a garden that spring. It was something I had always wanted to do and had never had time for. And now I had time, and the garden was turning out well. "Daniel," I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I genuinely do. But I need you to understand something. The version of me that you're remembering, the one who was useful to you, who understood the business, who kept things running, she spent a decade being told she wasn't enough. I'm not interested in being appreciated now because things are hard. That's not appreciation. That's need. He was quiet. I really do hope things improve for you, I said. But I'm not available in the way you're suggesting. He said something about staying in touch. I said I wished him well. We ended the call. That night I made dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat at my kitchen table with a folder I had been saving for exactly the right moment. When my mother had died, she had left me her estate, her house, her savings, and a small investment account that had been growing quietly for years. I had never touched any of it. I had left it in the accounts where she had kept it, because I couldn't bring myself to move it because doing so felt too final. But there was also a letter she had left with her attorney, to be given to me only in the event that my marriage ended. Her attorney had called me 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized and asked me to come in. I had read the letter in the attorney's office and I had cried for the first time since everything had happened. I cried for a long time. In the letter, my mother explained that she had watched my marriage for years with a quiet worry she had never voiced because she had not wanted to interfere. She wrote that she hoped she was wrong. She wrote that she had always prayed she was wrong. But she had loved me too much to leave me without a safety net, just in case. She had spent the last decade not only managing her own finances but quietly investing on my behalf, in an account in both our names that I had never known about. She had been methodical about it, the way she was methodical about everything. She had taken the same approach she took to bookkeeping, steady, careful, consistent, unshowy. She had never mentioned it because she had not wanted me to feel like she doubted me, or doubted the marriage. She had only wanted to make sure that if the marriage ever fell apart, I would land somewhere solid. The account, by the time I opened that folder, had grown to an amount that made me sit very still for a moment. My mother had been a bookkeeper for 30 years. She had noticed things other people missed. And she had loved me in the way quiet people love, not loudly, not with grand gestures, but steadily, the way a foundation holds a house. I looked at the folder for a long time. Then I closed it, picked up my wine, and went outside to look at the garden. I had been thinking for a while about what came next. I had a good settlement. I had my mother's gift. I had 11 years of financial expertise and a clearer sense of what I was capable of than I had ever had while I was busy making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's life. I had been talking to a former colleague about starting something together. A boutique financial consulting firm, small, specialized, the kind of practice I had always thought about and never thought I was allowed to want. I called her the next morning and said yes. The firm opened 8 months later. We had 3 clients in the first month, 12 by the end of the year. The work was hard and occasionally terrifying, and I loved it in a way I had not loved anything professional in a very long time. I was good at it. It turned out that the things Patricia had spent years dismissing, my practicality, my attention to detail, my tendency to see problems before they potted, were, in the right context, exactly what people needed. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Daniel had eventually managed to stabilize the logistics company, though it was much smaller than it had been. Megan was no longer in the picture. I heard, though I could not verify it and did not try to, that he had been seeing someone new. I hoped she was treated better than I had been. I genuinely hoped that. Patricia sent me a Christmas card that year. It was strange and a little surreal, and I stood at my front door holding it for a long moment. Inside she had written only, "I hope you are well, Rachel." Nothing more. I put it on the mantel. Not out of warmth exactly, but because my mother had raised me to be gracious, and being gracious does not require forgetting. The thing about leaving a situation that was making you small is that the growth, when it comes, is sometimes startling. You look up one day and you are standing in a life that is fully yours, the work you chose, the house you kept, the garden you planted, the quiet at the end of the day that belongs to no one but you, and you feel something that is not quite happiness in the simple sense but is something deeper and more durable. A kind of solid okayness, a kind of standing on your own ground. My mother used to say, when I was small and frustrated by something I couldn't control, "Rachel, the only thing you are ever really in charge of is your own preparation." She said it the way she said most things, matter-of-factly, without drama, as if it were simply a fact about the world worth noting. I didn't fully understand it when I was 7. I understand it now. Daniel was right about one thing. I am practical. I always was. He meant it as a criticism, as a way of saying I was too measured, too unromantic, too much in my head. But what practical really means, if you strip away the dismissal, is this: I pay attention. I plan. I don't panic. I don't act until I know what I'm doing. And when someone tells me I'm not enough, I file that information away, and I get organized. My husband left with a suitcase and a sentence designed to leave a mark. He had no idea that I had spent 7 months making sure I would be fine. He had no idea that my mother had spent a decade making sure I would be fine. He had no idea that the woman he was dismissing on his way out the door had already thought 3 steps ahead of everything he was about to do. He called it not being enough. I call it being exactly enough for exactly the right life. And I would like to think my mother would get a good, quiet laugh out of that.